Hi, I'm Melanie Ann Phillips, co-creator of the Dramatica theory of story. And in this episode of Beyond Dramatica, we're going to have part 2 of an exploration into how Dramatica predicts the future. Well, in part 1, we described how Dramatica does this in a story, in a closed system, in the story mind. We described how the meaning of the story will determine that things in the story have to happen in a certain order in order to arrive at that meaning. And that in the Dramatica software, you have a means of either describing what you want the story to mean. Does your main character change or not? Does it end in success or not? Are there male or female mental sex, the main character? And that will determine how things flip and rotate in the Dramatica model in the story engine, and ultimately predict the order in which things must happen to create that meaning. Similarly, you can start by putting the order in which you have these things happen, and it will then determine the meaning that will be derived from that particular order of events. I also described how in the original Dramatica story engine, we had that go all the way down to the scenes and beats and sequences of the story as well as the act level. But it put out so much information about the order in which things should happen. And in our particular culture, we're much more concerned with what we arrive at, the meaning, than we are concerned with how we got there in order. And so this amount of temporal information, sequential information, was way overwhelming and was totally confusing and made the program harder to use because there was too much information. So we suppressed it. It was in the story engine, but it's not in the current version of Dramatica because that information just gets in the way of trying to deal with the meaning, which is what most authors are focusing on. So, this was a closed system. The closed system of the story where you know everything that's going to happen in advance as an author, and therefore it's absolutely tied in to the order in which things happen. But what about an open system? What about our own psychologies, not the psychology of the story mind? In the real world, things are always happening to us. Things are always changing our outlook and our view. With the uncertainty principle, in an open system, you cannot tell what something is and also where it's heading, where it's going. Just like you look at an electron and you can tell everything about the electron, or you can tell where it's going and where it's headed, but you can't tell both things at the same time. You have your choice of one or the other. All right. So with that uncertainty principle, that only is a problem when you're dealing with an open system. In a closed system, there is no uncertainty because there are no extra elements that can be interjected, and everything's relationship, even if it's nonlinear, can be predicted absolutely. So in real life, we can't. We can't predict. So how can Dramatica predict the future? Well, first of all, if we look at somebody's state of mind, there are long wave changes and short wave changes, things that remain consistent for a whole lifetime and never change, things that will change maybe over several years, or perhaps seasonally and they have a cycle, or perhaps things that change on a dime and you never know. The chaos level creeps in the shorter waves. The longer waves are more stable and more predictable. So the first thing you can say is if you take a flash reading of somebody using Dramatica to analyze their psychology, well, then you're going to understand all about where they are right now in that flash photograph moment. And you'll understand something of the forces at work in those long wave areas, the most powerful, lasting forces, so you can still predict into the future where they're likely to go. But the moment any kind of a new experience comes into their life, or even some biochemical changes, it's going to alter that course. Meaning that, as Harry Seldon found out in the Foundation trilogy by Isaac Asimov, that you can predict near-term things with great certainty, but the farther on you get into the future, the more you're open to chaos, in his case in the form of a character called the Mule, who was unexpected, and his influence completely shot everything out the window that had been predicted. Well, so how can Dramatica counter this? Well, first of all, we can at least do a flash photograph and say if there was no chaos, this is where it would head. And that'll give us a pretty good idea, like when you look at a hurricane and say, here's the pathway, and this is where it's going to be Tuesday, and this is where it's going to be Wednesday, and this is where it's going to be Thursday, somewhere within this range, and it creates a cone of probability. All right? But the minute that you get a little farther, although you know it's not likely to go any beyond the edges of the cone that you originally anticipated, where it will fall will be more likely to be in a narrower area the closer you get to that area. So, how do we do that? Well, with Dramatica, we first take our flash photograph, and then we take another flash photograph, in a reasonable amount of time that we think is necessary to make sure that nothing big has happened and changed the likelihood outside of our original cone of prediction, like with a hurricane. In so doing, if you look at a single story form or a single story mind flash photograph as a frame in a movie, then if you take a series of these over time, you begin to be able to see how things are drifting, and you start to see patterns in the chaos. For example, if you did predict that it was going to go like this, and you take a second flash photograph, and now it looks like it's going to go like that, and you take a third photograph, and it looks like it's going to go like that, then that series of 3 story forms it's most accurate at the very end, where you know it's going to be over there, but also you've seen a trend that moves it like this. And if you take enough of those flash photographs, like one every day, one every hour, one every week of a particular situation, you can actually predict the kinds of influences that are moving something that you can't see. Because you see, there really is no such thing as chaos, at least not in a practical world. They're simply forces that are outside the scope of what we call a closed system. Now, it can be outside in the big picture by being things that are a movement, like the tides or some asteroid changing the tidal pole that we don't even see, and so therefore we can't know what it is that's affecting things, but we can feel its global effect. But also, chaos can be effective in the details, because beneath the level of detail you're looking at, there's always another level of detail even smaller, until you get down to vibrating packets of probability in quantum theory, and that's completely unpredictable, because you can't go any farther. You can't include them in your closed system. Well, so you end up with chaos from both sides, the macroscopic and the microscopic, but you can still find the trend lines even if you can't see what's causing the chaos, because if you could see it, you can incorporate it into your closed system, and then you could accurately predict it. So, why does this happen? Probability. Look at those pachinko games where you have a bunch of pins and they're put in certain even positions, and you drop a ball from the top and it bounces off these pins. You see them sometimes in Las Vegas or a casino, and eventually they fall into several slots at the bottom. There's slots all the way along the bottom. Now, where they fall cannot be predicted on any given ball, because it could go anywhere depending on how chaos strikes. However, over a period of time, a lot of balls fall, and they will end up making a bell curve like this, that most of them will fall near the center, and eventually there'll be a sharp and then a less sharp fall off, but there could always be a ball right at the edge. And that's what probability does. So when you're looking at these movie frames that go along in time, each one has the act order, the scene order, the order of the sequences, the beats within the scenes. All of that can be determined in the flash photograph. And if you put them together as a series of frames in a movie, then you can see the forces that are not one-offs, not one-time chaos, but repetitive chaos. Even if it's not cyclic, it can have collectively the force that gradually shifts things off to one side. Therefore, if you're trying to predict what kind of action you should take in the future or where somebody's going to be in the future, you can in fact chart this long enough to be able to be where they're going to end up. So if it's sort of going off in this direction here, then you could see that down at the beginning stages of it, and you could be right there waiting for that person with whatever you wanted to interject them at that point, to intersect their lives and have some impact, because you knew they'd be there. It's the same way as a golfer would look at a green on the putting green and hit the ball not towards the hole, but over to the side, because they're aware of the forces that will act on the ball, or that will act because they can see the lay of the land. And that's what you begin to see. It shines a flashlight with this series of flash photographs of movie frames on the lay of the land in space-time, and tells you what kind of influences are there so that you can alter your effect. If you chart something long enough, you may even see that it starts out going this way and then goes back that way and goes back this way, and you might start to see cycles in these terms. So instead of just saying we're going to follow it along this way and be there for them, you could say, well, we realize that it's going to go this way, and overall it's going to be here then. So barring any large chaotic force, any spatial summation chaos, as opposed to temporal summation. Spatial summation would be something really big all at once, a global catastrophe, a planet killer that comes out of nowhere, as opposed to the gradual progression of chaos, which actually indicates the cyclic nature of things outside of your closed system, by its influence, the same way you can look at how a star may have a wobble in it and predict it must have a companion or a planet in orbit because of that wobble, and actually tell a lot about that other body that is unseen. Now, this would be fine with individuals, and very interesting, but it's even more useful and more accurate in terms of groups, because fractal psychology, a concept to come out of Dramatica, says that when people, each having the same operating system as described by the story mind, each of us has the same operating system in two varieties like Mac and Windows, male and female. We can run the same kinds of programs, but it has a different look and feel, and it feels different to be within the system. Well, that's how men and women differ. But we have the same basic components of psychology, it's just how we arrange them, the order in which we go through things that's different between men and women, and therefore it creates different priorities, and in fact filters information out of the universe so that we see a different picture of what reality is. That's why we can never agree on reality, men and women, because we're each seeing it differently through our own operating systems, because every operating system in the end is a filter that stands between us and true reality. We cannot see it except by parsing it through our operating system, which naturally is a filter that accentuates some things and diminishes others. When we have these operating systems, though, and we come together in groups, because of fractal psychology, we try to organize what we do as individuals in the group, and therefore the group self-organizes without any intent into a larger psychology that is a fractal operating system of the same operating systems as the individuals that make up the group. If it was made up of all men, it would be one way. If it was made up of all women, it would be another. If it was made up of a combination of men and women, it will be just like the societies we see where men and women get together. And everything we do, our language, our culture, our religion, our laws, our form of government, all self-organize according to a story form pattern, because the individuals have those, and when they get together, like Bucky Fuller said, who invented the geodesic dome, he said that the flow of energy through a system tends to organize that system. Similarly, the flow of psychology, because the mind is a machine made of time, and it must be in motion to exist. And because of that, it is constantly in motion, in flux, and because of that, the patterns that each psychology creates create those same interference patterns in the larger picture. And if you have a group of clubs, they could come together to make an even larger psychology, just like object-oriented programming, where a single psychology is a process treated as an object. Many psychologies of individuals go together to create a larger object called a club or a clique or a clan. A number of those clans could be treated as objects and create a larger psychology. There would be a culture, or a society, or even a global consciousness, as it were. Well, when you do this, you can still use those same concepts of taking a flash photograph of every psychology that you wish to study at every fractal level. And when you do, the more of these you do, the more predictive you will be of what's going to go on within your closed system called the planet. Okay? Now there's always chaos there because, again, the stray cosmic ray can cause somebody's mind to alter a little bit and upset the equation. This is not second foundation, not yet anyway. But what it is the opportunity to have a more clear look into the future using psychology that can predict the stock market, can predict wars, can predict economies, can predict the flow of culture and the change of culture, all of this within very tight parameters based on the flash photographs done as movie frames so that you can see the effect of chaos, doing it long enough to see the cyclic form of chaos, and doing it all fractal levels so you can see the wheels within wheels and understand their influence upon one another. A system like that, a computer program like that, would be able to actually determine what's going to happen in the future with absolute accuracy, except for things that happen unexpected in the physical sense, like earthquakes or like a volcano exploding. On the other hand, a system like this can be equally applied to physics. And if you got data about physics, you would know exactly when that earthquake was going to happen and how big it would be and where it would occur, and the same for the volcano as well. You just can't do the earthquakes and the psychology at the same time. That's the uncertainty principle. And on that note, as uncertain as it may seem, I'm certainly Melanie Ann Phillips, and I really certainly hope you'll join us at storymind.com for more about the Dramatica theory and software.